The first time I thought about doing it, I nearly threw up. I remember sitting in my truck in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, thinking about how close I was to losing everything again. The world was quiet outside, but inside, my head was a storm screaming louder with every passing second. I just dropped off the last payment, the final one that I knew would break me. I had nothing left. Nothing except the pain, the regret, and one last shot at something I couldn't even fully name at the time. But that day, in the stillness of that truck, I made a decision. I made a promise. To myself. And I'd keep it no matter the cost. It's funny how life can be so simple, so easily broken. You think you have it all figured out. Good job, decent house, family dinners, a life you fought for. I worked my whole damn life to build something that mattered, only to watch it crumble like a house of cards. I'm not talking about the things that get taken. Those things are easy to lose. I'm talking about the stuff inside. The love, the loyalty, the trust. When it's gone, you're left with nothing but empty rooms and memories that sting. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I let it happen. I'm 50 years old now. I've seen a lot, I've been through a lot. Some people think that by the time you hit 50, you've got it all figured out. Let me tell you something, life doesn't get easier. It doesn't hand you some magic key to unlock the answers. All it does is push you further into the corner, tighter and tighter until you're gasping for air. And when the air's gone, when you can't breathe anymore, when you're so far down that the light looks like a joke, that's when you get dangerous. That's when you start thinking about revenge. My name is Sam Carter. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Hell, I don't even know what a silver spoon looks like. I came from nothing, and for a long time I built something. I started with small jobs, construction, manual labor, whatever I could get. Worked hard, kept my head down, met a girl, married her, bought a house, had 2 kids, lived what they call the American dream. I thought it was enough. I thought I could be happy with that. Then I found out how much I didn't know. It started with my son, Andrew. Andrew was always the quiet one, the good one. He stayed out of trouble, did well in school. I was proud of him like any father would be. I wanted him to have it all, and so I made sure he had it all. I sacrificed everything, long hours, lost sleep, missing family dinners, all so he could have the best. You know, the kind of best you don't get when your dad's a guy who works with his hands and doesn't have a college degree. But I did it. I worked myself ragged for him. I thought that's what a father was supposed to do. But when I needed him the most, when I needed just one goddamn conversation with him, when I needed him to show up for me, he wasn't there. He wasn't even close. Andrew had been distant for months, but I didn't want to admit it. I kept making excuses, telling myself it was just a phase. Then one day he called. I remember the tone in his voice. It was cold, distant. He was at a restaurant with his girlfriend, and all he wanted to say was that he wasn't coming home for Thanksgiving. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. I knew. There was a new life waiting for him, a life that didn't include me. A life where I was just a figure in the background, a man who had once mattered but no longer did. I tried to brush it off. I really did. I told myself it was just part of him growing up, but then things started changing. I started noticing how he was treating me, how the distance grew wider and wider until I was a ghost in my own son's life. A few weeks later, my wife, Linda, dropped a bombshell. She said Andrew had been spending more time with his girlfriend's parents. I didn't think much of it at first. Parents want to be involved in their kids' lives. It happens. But then Linda said something I'll never forget. She told me that Andrew was talking about buying a house with her family. The girlfriend's family, the people who had done nothing for him, who had never worked a day to give him a chance. They didn't even know how hard I worked, how much I'd given up to help him get where he was. And yet, there they were, swooping in to take everything I had given him. The first thing that came to my mind was a question. What the hell did I do all this for? I let it go, but I shouldn't have. Then came Christmas. I had just lost my job at the factory after 23 years of dedication. The plant had shut down and I didn't have a damn thing left. No severance, no benefits, nothing. I sat on that couch, feeling the weight of the years, the sweat, the sacrifice. I had nothing left to give. I called Andrew hoping he'd answer, hoping he'd remember what I had done for him, but when I dialed, he didn't pick up. I left a message and all I said was, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, son." You know what he did? He sent me a text saying he was too busy to help the man who had given him everything. That was the final straw. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't about the house or the hours I'd worked or the nights I spent alone. It was about respect. It was about the man I had become and the people who had taken that man and thrown him away like he was nothing. So I made a decision that night, a decision I didn't even fully understand at the time. I decided I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to be their fool anymore. If you want to know what happened next, you should probably subscribe. You won't believe where this story goes. The morning after I made my decision, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't had in years. It wasn't relief, but it was something close to it. Like a heavy weight had been lifted off my chest, but not in the way you might expect. More like a deep, unsettling calm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't drowning in guilt or regret. I wasn't searching for answers. I had one now. I'm sure you're wondering what exactly I meant by that. What could a man like me, someone who'd worked his fingers to the bone for decades, possibly have in mind when he decided enough was enough? Trust me, I didn't have all the details worked out yet. But one thing I knew for certain, there would be no more sacrifice. No more giving up my life for people who couldn't even be bothered to pick up the phone. I looked at myself in the mirror that morning. The man staring back at me looked different somehow. Tired, yes, but there was something else in his eyes, something sharp, something dangerous. I'd spent too many years being invisible to the people I cared about. My wife, my son, my own damn family, but no more. It was time they saw who I really was. It was time to remind them. I had to act fast. The clock was ticking, and every moment I waited was another moment wasted. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore, and I wasn't going to beg for a seat at anyone's table. I'd been giving and giving, but I hadn't got anything back. Nothing but disrespect, betrayal, and the belief that I was weak, easy to ignore. But that was about to change. So I started with what I knew, what I had, the house, my house. It had always been our home. Linda and I had built it together from the ground up. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. A place where our kids grew up, where we spent holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. But the thing about a home is that it's not just bricks and wood, it's the memories, the love, the sacrifices that go into making it. And when someone decides they're done with you, that's exactly what they want to take. They want to take everything. The house, the memories, everything you've worked for. And they don't even care if you're left with nothing. I had spent years working overtime, taking second jobs, all so Linda and the kids could have a life that felt like something. I did it because I loved them, but I never imagined that one day they would turn their backs on me so completely. And then there was Andrew. He was the one I had hoped would appreciate the struggle, the one I thought I had done all of this for. I didn't expect him to understand it all, but I thought he'd see the value in it. After all, it was him I'd sacrificed for. But now I couldn't even get him on the phone. I couldn't get him to show up for Christmas dinner, and when I did talk to him, it was always an excuse, always a reason why he couldn't be there. The day I finally decided to do something about it, I sat down at my kitchen table. My fingers hovered over the phone, ready to make a call that would change everything. I'd known it was coming, but I hadn't been sure when. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I was about to make my move. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed the number. I had been avoiding this for weeks, but it was time to take the first step. I called my lawyer. His name's Frank, and I've known him for years. Frank was the kind of guy who didn't judge people. He didn't care if you were the town's richest businessman or the guy who had worked at the same factory for his whole life. Frank just cared about getting things done. And right now, that's exactly what I needed. I needed to get things done. When Frank picked up, he didn't waste any time on pleasantries. He knew what this was about. "Sam, what's going on?" he asked. "I need to sell the house," I said, my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him shuffling papers, probably wondering if he had misunderstood. "Are you sure? I mean, you've been in that house for—" "I'm sure," I interrupted. "I'm done. I need to get out. I need to move on." Frank didn't ask any more questions. He didn't have to. He knew my situation. He'd seen it before. He'd seen men like me, men who had given everything to their families, only to be left empty-handed. He knew what it looked like when a man finally snapped. "I'll get the ball rolling," Frank said. "It'll take a little time, but I can help you with the paperwork, get everything in order. You'll be able to sell quickly." That's all I needed to hear. I had been holding onto that house for too long, holding onto the memory of something that wasn't even real anymore. That house wasn't home. It was just a reminder of everything I had lost. It wasn't just about the money either. The house was a symbol of everything I had worked for and everything that had been taken from me. I was going to sell it, and I was going to take back control of my life. For the first time in years, I was making a decision for myself. The call ended and I sat there staring at the phone. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel, but I didn't feel fear or regret. What I felt was freedom. I wasn't their fool anymore. If you want to know how I plan to make them regret every second of their betrayal, you should probably subscribe. You won't believe how this story unfolds. The next few days passed in a blur, a strange mix of calm and urgency, like I was walking through a fog that both shielded me from my past and pushed me toward a future I couldn't yet see clearly. The call with Frank had been the first step, but there was still so much more to do. The house was just the beginning. I couldn't let myself dwell on the past too much, on the guilt or the regrets. If I did, I'd be paralyzed. I'd fall back into the same habits of putting everyone else first, sacrificing for people who didn't even care enough to pick up the phone. I'd done that for years, and look where it had gotten me, alone, broke, and stripped of dignity. No, I couldn't afford that kind of thinking anymore. I'd spent a lifetime taking the high road, turning the other cheek. But now I was going to make sure that I was seen, and if I had to burn everything to the ground to make that happen, then so be it. That morning, after I'd talked to Frank, I decided to take a walk. The weather had turned cold and the air was biting, but there was something about the crispness that felt good. It felt like the world was offering me a fresh start. I threw on my old jacket, the one I'd had for years but still loved, and headed outside. The neighborhood was quiet. You could hear the faint hum of distant traffic, but it wasn't as loud as usual. People were still at work, kids were in school. It was just me, alone with my thoughts, walking through streets that I had walked 1,000 times before. Only this time it felt different. It felt like I was walking through someone else's life, someone who had once cared about this place but was now just trying to move on. I walked past the old park where Andrew used to play when he was a kid. It didn't look the same anymore. Kids were playing, but the laughter didn't sound right. It sounded distant, like it was coming from another world. Andrew's world, not mine. I kept walking. The cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't mind it. It felt like a wake-up call. It was time to shake off the past, to stop being the man who let others control his destiny. My life had been in the hands of people who didn't deserve it, and I had let that happen, but no more. The house was going to be sold. There was no turning back. And with that sale, I would reclaim something I had lost, a sense of self-worth, a sense of power. I had spent years being the silent supporter, the one who picked up the pieces, but that wasn't going to be me anymore. I wasn't going to be the one left holding the bag. I reached the corner of my block, and that's when I saw them, my neighbors, the ones who had always looked at me with that polite smile, that knowing look in their eyes. The one that said they knew I was just the working guy, the one who would never have the things they did, the one who would always be there to lend a hand, to help with the lawn or move furniture or fix a leaky pipe. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I wasn't the guy who helped everyone else and watched his own life fall apart. "Morning, Sam," Greg called out from across the street. He was standing in his driveway, adjusting his expensive car cover. His wife, Kelly, was in the garden, planting flowers in the cold soil, as if she were creating a perfect little world in the middle of this suburban hell. I forced a smile and waved, but inside I was seething. They didn't know what I had sacrificed for my family. They didn't know how hard I had worked just to keep up appearances, just to keep them from seeing what I really was, a man drowning in debt, in regret, in loneliness. A man who had been used time and time again by those who should have been closest to him. "Everything good?" Greg asked, his voice casual, like he was asking about the weather, not about a man whose life was falling apart. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding like it didn't belong to me. It was steady, controlled. "Just taking a walk, clearing my head." "Good, good," Greg replied, not even bothering to look at me fully. He had already turned his attention back to his car, wiping it down like it was the most important thing in the world. I turned and walked away, not bothering to say goodbye. I didn't need to explain myself to him, or to anyone. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but think about all the times I had done what they asked, all the times I had given when there was nothing left to give, all the times I had smiled and pretended everything was fine, when deep down I was dying. That was over now. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and grabbed the papers from the table, the papers I had been avoiding for weeks, the papers I had known would change everything. I picked up the phone and dialed Frank's number again. My hand shook slightly, but not because I was scared. I wasn't scared anymore. "Sam," Frank said when he picked up, his voice neutral but familiar. "Get it done," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I want to sell it, I want it gone, no more waiting." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the rustle of papers, the sound of Frank processing the decision. "Are you sure about this? Once it's sold, there's no going back," Frank asked, and I could hear the caution in his voice. He knew me too well. "I'm sure. I've been sure for a while now," I replied. "All right," Frank said, his tone shifting into something more professional. "I'll start the process. It'll take time, but we'll get it done." I hung up the phone and sat there in the silence of my house, the house that wasn't really mine anymore. This was it. This was the beginning of something I couldn't have predicted, something I hadn't even fully prepared myself for. But I knew it was time to take back everything I had lost. If you're wondering how it all played out, well, you might want to subscribe. Trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. And what happened next is something they'll never forget. The days after I made the decision felt like they stretched out endlessly in front of me, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was going to come next. I tried to keep a low profile, to stay busy. But even as I worked through the motions of daily life, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. It was like a heavy door had slammed shut behind me, and now there was no going back. There was something oddly liberating about it, though. I had always feared the unknown, the uncertainty of what might come next, but now it felt different. I wasn't afraid anymore. The past few months had been a slow burn, and that fire had finally reached its tipping point. I didn't care if it all came crashing down around me. It was too late to turn back now. I kept thinking about what Frank had said. The moment you make the decision, there's no turning back. And that was the thing, wasn't it? Once you make the decision to reclaim control, you can't second-guess it. You can't stand on the sidelines anymore, watching your life slip through your fingers. You have to act, and act fast. That's why 2 days after the call with Frank, I found myself standing outside Andrew's apartment, staring at the door like it was a barrier I couldn't quite cross. I'd been here before many times. He didn't live too far from my place. I used to come over just to check in, to make sure he was doing okay. I hadn't heard from him since our last brief conversation, when he'd mentioned that he was too busy to make it home for Christmas, and honestly, I wasn't expecting him to be home now. But that was part of it, wasn't it? They never expect you to make a move. They never see it coming. I wanted to make sure he understood exactly where things stood between us. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't going to sit in the background anymore. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and rang the doorbell. It felt like my heart was in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, or even if I'd be able to say anything at all. But I knew I had to do this. He had to know the truth. The door opened slowly. There was Andrew, his hair disheveled, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and sweatpants. His face was a little more lined than I remembered, and his eyes were tired. He hadn't changed much, at least on the outside, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Dad," he said, his voice caught somewhere between surprise and confusion. He stepped back, giving me just enough room to step inside. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to sound calm. "I wanted to talk." Andrew looked at me, his expression hard to read. He didn't say anything at first, and I could feel the awkwardness hanging between us like a thick fog. He motioned toward the couch, and I sat down, trying to act like everything was normal, but nothing was normal anymore. "I don't know what you want, Dad," he said after a long pause. "I didn't know you were coming by. Is something wrong?" I stared at him for a second, taking in his words. The same old Andrew, the same half-hearted concern, the same distance. I couldn't let myself get emotional. Not this time. I had to be clear, even if it hurt. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Nothing's wrong. But you're not getting it, Andrew. I've been carrying this family for years, and all I've gotten from you is distance. I've sacrificed everything, and you can't even pick up the phone." He flinched at the words, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to make him understand. "You think I'm just some guy who's always going to be there when you need something, but I'm not that guy anymore. You've taken everything from me, and I've had enough." His face hardened, the walls going up like a fortress. He crossed his arms, his eyes avoiding mine. "I didn't take anything from you," he muttered, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "You don't get it, do you?" I leaned forward, feeling a surge of anger build in my chest. "You think I've been just some provider, some ATM for your whole life, but that's all you've ever seen me as, isn't it? A means to an end." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from the frustration that had been building inside me for years, a frustration that had finally boiled over. "I gave you everything, Andrew. Everything," I said, the words coming out faster now, almost on their own. "I worked myself to the bone so you could have a life better than mine, and this is what I get in return. You shut me out. You get involved with people who don't even care about you. You let them convince you that I don't matter anymore." He didn't say anything, just stood there, his eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't know if he was embarrassed or just too proud to admit the truth. But either way, I wasn't finished yet. "I've been waiting for you to show up, for you to care, but you haven't. And I'm done, Andrew. I'm done being the fool. I'm done doing everything for you, only to be treated like I'm invisible." I could see his shoulders tense, and for a moment I thought he might finally say something, finally apologize or explain himself. But then he just shook his head and looked away. "Look, Dad," he said quietly, "I didn't ask you to do any of that. I didn't ask for your help." That hit me like a slap to the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had given him, he was telling me that I had done it all for nothing. "You didn't have to ask," I said, my voice low and controlled. "That's the problem, Andrew. I did it because I loved you, but I'm done loving you like this. You need to figure things out on your own, just like I had to." For a moment the room was silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. Finally, I stood up. "I came here to tell you that I'm selling the house," I said, my tone flat. "I don't need it anymore. It's time to move on. It's time for you to realize I'm not going to be your safety net anymore." His eyes shot up to meet mine, but I was already turning toward the door. I couldn't look back. I couldn't stay here any longer. I opened the door, and before I stepped out, I looked at him one last time. "You need to grow up, Andrew. You need to stop using people to get what you want. And when you finally realize that, you'll understand why I did what I did." I left him standing there, in that apartment that had once been a place I imagined him thriving, but not anymore. I couldn't keep living in that illusion. If you want to know what came next, if you want to understand the full price they had to pay for what they did to me, you should probably subscribe. The worst was still yet to come. The walk back to my truck felt like I was stepping into a new reality, one that I hadn't fully processed yet. My steps were slower than usual, deliberate, as though I was afraid the ground beneath me would shift and I would lose my footing. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had said the words I needed to say to Andrew, even if it didn't land the way I wanted it to. I wasn't waiting for him to change in that moment. No, I had already made up my mind that things were different now. When I got back to the truck, I sat for a few minutes before starting the engine. It was cold outside, but I didn't feel the bite of the winter air. The warmth of the truck's heater didn't even register. My thoughts kept circling back to that apartment, to Andrew standing there, arms crossed, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. It wasn't the first time he had disappointed me, but it was the first time I had really seen it, the full scope of it. The way he had turned his back, not just on me, but on everything I had done for him. It hit me harder than I had anticipated. I had been carrying this weight for so long, never knowing that the people I had been carrying it for didn't even care that I was suffocating. But I wasn't going to dwell on it. That was the last time I would let myself feel that way. I was tired of being the one who got left behind, the one who was overlooked. There was no more apologizing for who I was, no more silent sacrifices. I turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. I couldn't tell you where I was driving. I wasn't thinking about the destination. I just needed to go. I needed to clear my head, to be alone with my thoughts. And the more I drove, the more the weight lifted, little by little, like peeling layers off a wound. I ended up at the old diner. It wasn't far from my place, just outside of town. The kind of place you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. But I always came here when I needed to think. The booth in the back near the window was empty. Perfect. I slid into the seat and the waitress, an older woman who knew me by now, gave me a nod as she passed. "You need the usual, Sam?" she asked, not even writing it down. "Yeah," I said, looking out the window at the gray sky. It wasn't quite snowing yet, but the air had that sharp bite to it that you know is coming. The waitress didn't linger, but I could see her eyes flicking over to me every so often as she worked. She knew I wasn't just here for a cup of coffee. I was here because I needed space. I needed silence to process what I had just done. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I thought about Linda. She wasn't the kind of person who would have stood by and let me go down this road. I could hear her voice in my head, as clear as the day she passed. "Don't let them make you bitter, Sam. Don't let them take your kindness away." But it was too late for that, wasn't it? I had let them take too much, and I had let myself be weak for too long. The waitress came back with my food and I took a bite, savoring the warmth of it. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain burger and fries, but there was something comforting about it. Something that reminded me of better days, of simpler times when I wasn't so lost, when I had hope. But now that hope had changed. I wasn't waiting for things to get better anymore. I was making them better. By the time I finished my meal, my mind was already racing again. My thoughts were back on the house. The sale wasn't final yet, but it would be soon. And when it was, I would have the freedom I'd been craving for years. I would no longer be chained to a place that represented everything I had lost. I paid the bill, left a tip, and stepped back into the cold air. The walk to the truck felt longer this time. Maybe it was the weight of what I had just realized. Maybe it was the anticipation of what was to come. But either way, I felt like I had taken another step forward. Another layer had peeled away. Over the next few days, I kept moving forward and the change felt inevitable. But it wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about selling the things I had once cared for. This was about me, about finally taking control of my life. I had spent too long being the one who bent over backward for others, being the one who was always there when people needed something, even when I had nothing left to give. I was done being that guy. I was done being the one who got walked on. And that's when I started planning. It wasn't enough just to let things happen. No, I needed to make sure they understood what they had done. Not just Andrew, not just Linda's family. It was all of them. My friends who hadn't really been friends. Neighbors who thought they knew me. People who had treated me like I was invisible. They were all going to learn that you couldn't just take from someone without consequences. That's when I knew what I had to do. But you'll have to wait to find out exactly what happened next. If you're curious about the plan I had, you might want to subscribe. Believe me, things were about to get even more interesting. The days that followed felt like I was living in a world that didn't belong to me, like I was standing on the edge of something huge and unknown, and the only thing I could do was wait for it to come crashing down. I kept telling myself I had no choice, that the decisions I had made had been inevitable. But the truth was, I didn't know what was coming next, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Selling the house was one thing, but I knew deep down that the real work was just beginning. This wasn't about property or money anymore. This was about making them see. This was about making them feel the consequences of what they had done. I had spent too long being the one who gave, the one who sacrificed. My whole life I had believed in family. I had believed that blood was thicker than water, that loyalty meant something, that love was a bond you could rely on. But that belief had shattered the moment Andrew couldn't even pick up the phone, the moment Linda's family turned their back on me. That was when I realized that loyalty wasn't a guarantee. Love wasn't a guarantee. And that's when I started planning. It wasn't about revenge in the typical sense. I wasn't going to go out and destroy things or lash out in some dramatic outburst. No, my revenge would be more subtle, more calculated. I was going to make sure they all knew exactly what they had done to me, and I wasn't going to let them forget it, not for a second. The first piece of the plan fell into place when I contacted Frank. He had been handling the paperwork for the house sale, but now I needed his help with something else. It wasn't enough to simply sell the house. I needed to make sure that when the transaction went through, it would hit them like a freight train. I needed to make sure Andrew would never forget how easily he had walked away from me, how easily he had discarded everything I had given him, everything I had sacrificed for him. "Sam, I'm here," Frank said when I met him at his office. His desk was cluttered with papers, but there was something comforting about the chaos. He always worked that way, moving quickly, decisively. He was the kind of guy who made things happen. "Thanks for meeting me, Frank," I said, sitting down across from him. "I need to make sure everything goes according to plan." "I'm listening," he replied, looking up from his papers. "I want you to make sure the sale goes through quickly," I said, "but there's something else I need. When the check comes through, I want it in a way that Andrew will notice. I want him to see exactly what he's losing. I want him to see how far I've gone, how much I've done for him, and how easily he's thrown it all away." Frank raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You're not talking about anything illegal, are you?" I shook my head. "Nothing like that, but I want him to understand. I want him to feel the weight of what he's done." "You're a man of few words, Sam, but I get it," Frank said, nodding. "Leave it to me. I'll make sure it's done the right way." And with that, the plan was set into motion. But that wasn't the only part of it. I needed to make sure Linda's family felt it too. They had played their part in this betrayal, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook. They had always acted like they were above me, above us. They had always looked down on me, like I was just the man who did all the hard work behind the scenes, the one who paid the bills and fixed things but never got the credit. Well, they were going to see who I really was, and they were going to regret ever thinking they could walk all over me. The next step of the plan involved a call I had been dreading for weeks. I needed to reach out to Linda's brother, Roger. He was the one who had always been the most dismissive, the one who acted like my presence was a burden. He had made it clear, in subtle ways, that he thought I wasn't good enough for his sister, and that I couldn't let slide. When Roger picked up the phone, his voice was what I expected, polite but distant. "Sam, how's it going?" "It's going," I said, my voice tight. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Sure, what's up?" he asked, but I could hear the unease creeping into his tone. "I've sold the house," I said, keeping it simple. I wanted him to hear the weight of it in my voice, to let him know that I had already taken the step that they thought I would never take. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Oh," Roger said, sounding like I had just thrown a wrench in his gears. "Well, that's quick." "Yeah," I replied. I wasn't planning to waste any more time, but there's something I wanted to make clear. The sale of the house isn't just a business deal, it's personal. I've spent years taking care of everything, doing everything for you all, but I'm done. I'm done being the one who fixes things. I heard the sound of him clearing his throat. "I get it, Sam, but look, we all appreciate what you did." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get it, you've never understood, and I'm tired of pretending that everything's fine when it's not." The silence on the other end felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Roger spoke. "Sam, I don't know what you're trying to say." "I'm saying that when I sell this house, when everything is done, you'll finally understand what you've lost. And you'll understand what I had to give up to make sure you all had it all. But that's it. I'm not fixing things anymore. I'm not making your problems my problems. You'll all have to figure it out on your own from now on." And with that, I hung up. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew they wouldn't just accept it and move on, but I didn't care anymore. They had taken too much from me, and I wasn't going to let them take anything else. This was the beginning, and as I drove away from Roger's house that day, I could feel the weight lifting, one piece at a time. You might be wondering how everything turned out after that. If you want to know just how deep the consequences went, how everything unraveled, you should probably subscribe. You won't believe what happened next. The next few days were the longest of my life. I wasn't used to the silence that had settled over me. It was almost as if the world had taken a step back, holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I'd sold the house, cut the ties with my family, and now I was alone in a way I had never been before. Alone, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The weight of all those years of sacrifice, all those years of being invisible to the people I loved, was starting to lift. But that wasn't the end of it, not even close. Andrew had been quiet since our confrontation, not a word, and that was exactly what I expected. He had always been one to run from confrontation, to bury his head in the sand whenever things got tough. I knew he wouldn't come looking for answers. That wasn't his style. But I wasn't waiting for him to come around anymore. I was done waiting for anyone. I had made my decision, and now it was time to let them all feel the consequences. It was early one morning when I got the first text. I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but when my phone buzzed, I knew it was inevitable. It was from Andrew. "I need to talk." I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how I felt. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep walking down the path I had chosen. But another part of me, the part that still cared, the part that still hoped, wanted to respond. Maybe he was finally getting it. Maybe he was going to come to his senses and realize how much he had taken me for granted. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat back in my chair, thinking about all the years of giving, all the years of bending over backward, trying to make sure he had everything he needed, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. It had always been for him, for my son, who had grown up so quickly, so easily, leaving me behind without even a second thought. I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I couldn't keep pretending that things would get better, that he would eventually wake up and see me for what I had done for him. So I decided I wasn't going to respond, at least not right away. But that night, as I lay in bed, the message gnawed at me. I couldn't help but wonder, what did he want? What was he hoping to get out of this? Was he finally ready to take responsibility? Or was he just looking for a way to make everything right without actually admitting his mistakes? I knew deep down that he wasn't coming to me with an apology. He was coming because something had gone wrong on his end. Something had shifted, and he needed something from me. That's how it always worked. He always came to me when he needed something, and I had always given it to him. But not this time. The next morning the phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Sam. Dad, we need to talk. I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the silence stretch between us, making him wait, making him feel the tension that I had felt for years. What's there to talk about, Andrew? I finally asked, my voice calm, controlled. I know things have been rough, he said, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I've been thinking about everything about what happened, and I need to apologize for the way I've treated you. I heard those words, but they didn't quite land the way I expected. They didn't hit with the weight they should have. Instead, they felt hollow, like he was just saying the words to check a box, to make himself feel better. I wasn't going to let that slide. I've been waiting for you to say that, I said. But you know, Andrew, words don't mean anything if they're not backed up by actions. You've been saying you're sorry for years, but I never see the change. I never see the effort. I'm trying, he said quickly. I don't know how to fix it. You don't fix it by apologizing, I said, cutting him off. You fix it by showing up. You fix it by actually giving a damn about the people who have been there for you your entire life. You don't get to just walk away and then come back when it's convenient for you. That's not how this works, Andrew. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't know what to say next. And that's when I realized he still didn't get it. He still didn't understand the depth of what he had done. He was still looking for a quick fix, for an easy way out, as if saying sorry would somehow erase everything. Well, I said finally, breaking the silence, I've got news for you. I'm not the guy you can lean on anymore. I'm done being the backup. You have to figure this out on your own. Dad, please, don't shut me out, Andrew said, his voice rising with desperation. I know I messed up. I know I took you for granted, but I don't know what to do without you. I don't want to lose you. Then you should have thought about that before you started treating me like I was invisible, I said, my voice growing harder. You've lost me, Andrew, and it's not something you can just fix with an apology. The call ended with a soft click, and for a moment I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and relief. He wasn't going to change, not unless he wanted to, and from the sound of it, he wasn't ready to do that. I knew then that this wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about me reclaiming my life. It was about me finally saying enough. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Stick around, subscribe. You'll want to know what happened next. It gets even darker before the light begins to shine. I sat there in the silence, the weight of everything hitting me like a ton of bricks. The call with Andrew wasn't what I expected, but it was exactly what I needed. It was confirmation. I had hoped for years that things would change, that the relationship with my son could be repaired. But now I knew. It wasn't just his fault. It wasn't just Linda's family's fault. It was mine too. I had allowed this to happen. I had kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept hoping, when what I should have done years ago was put my foot down. That was the hard truth. I had let my own sense of duty, my own guilt, drive my actions. I had let myself believe that if I just gave enough, if I just worked hard enough, I could earn their love. But all I had earned was exhaustion and loneliness. But now things were different. The house was sold, and with it, all the false hopes I had held onto. I had been a fool, but now I was free. Free of the weight I had carried for far too long. And while it didn't feel like freedom yet, I could almost taste it. I knew it was coming. But the problem was, I wasn't finished. I had planned it all along, and now I had to see it through. There were still people who needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Linda's family was first. I hadn't yet dealt with them properly. They hadn't even apologized. They hadn't made it right, not in the least. In fact, they were probably going to try and move on as if they hadn't just destroyed everything I had worked for. As if I hadn't given them everything, even when they didn't deserve it. I had to make sure they understood. So I decided to pay them a visit. I knew exactly where they lived. Linda's parents, Kathy and Richard, had a beautiful house on the other side of town, big, shiny, and impressive, the kind of house where you'd walk in and feel like you had to prove yourself. I had spent years looking up to them, pretending like their way of life was something I admired, when in reality, all they had ever done was look down on me. They had always treated me like an outsider, never truly accepting me into their world. It was time to change that. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, the cold air biting at my face as I made my way to the car. The drive felt like it took forever. I wasn't sure what I was going to say when I got there. I wasn't even sure if they'd answer the door. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to leave until they understood exactly what they had done. When I finally pulled up in front of their house, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at it. The house that had always been a symbol of their success. The house that had always made me feel like I was just a bystander in my own family. I had worked my ass off for years, and yet they were the ones who had everything. I knew what I had to do. I had to remind them of who I was. I had to remind them that I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the guy they could walk all over and get away with it. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. The cold wind seemed to grow stronger the closer I got, but I didn't care. I knocked on the door, hard enough that it echoed in the quiet neighborhood. I stood there for a moment, waiting, and then the door opened. Kathy stood there, a look of mild surprise on her face. She was in her robe, clearly not expecting company, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to make small talk. I wasn't here to play nice. "Sam," she said, clearly caught off guard, "what are you doing here?" "I think we need to talk," I said, stepping forward. She hesitated, and I could see the defensive walls going up. She knew exactly what this was about. She had to. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice trying to sound calm, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "Let's not play games, Kathy," I said. "You know what this is about." She stepped back, clearly uncomfortable, and I took that as an invitation to come inside. It wasn't much of an invitation, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to wait out here any longer. I walked past her into the living room, where Richard was sitting in his chair, reading the newspaper. He looked up as I entered and immediately set the paper down. "Sam, what's going on?" he asked, his voice cold but not entirely unfriendly. "I think you both know exactly why I'm here," I said, my voice low but steady. "You both have a lot of nerve treating me like I'm some charity case. You've used me, Richard. You've used Linda and you've used Andrew. And now that I'm finally standing up for myself, you're trying to pretend like none of this ever happened." Richard opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. "You've spent years looking down on me like I'm just a working man who doesn't matter, like I'm not good enough for your daughter. Well, I've had enough. I've done enough. And now I'm done." "You don't know what you're talking about, Sam," Kathy said, stepping forward. "We've done nothing but try to help you, try to support you. You've always been part of the family." "Don't," I cut in, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare pretend like you've been supportive. You've treated me like an outsider. You've treated me like I'm nothing. I've given everything I had to make sure your family had what they wanted. And now I'm taking back what's mine." Richard stood up, his face reddening. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not leaving, not until you both understand what you've done." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Neither of them knew what to say, and I was fine with that. They didn't need to say anything. They needed to feel the weight of my words, feel the truth in them. "I'm done being your fool," I said, turning to leave. But don't worry, I'm not the one who's going to regret it. As I walked back to the door, I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't turn around. I had made my point, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. When I stepped back outside, the wind had picked up again, but I felt stronger. I felt like I had finally taken control of the situation. If you think that was the end of it, you'd be wrong. Things were about to get much more complicated. You won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, hit subscribe. This story isn't over yet. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my cool. The interactions with Linda's family had gone exactly as I expected, predictable, defensive, and ultimately useless. I had left their house that day with a sense of closure, but it wasn't the kind of closure I had hoped for. I wanted them to understand. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to see the toll it had taken on me. But I didn't think they would. They were too entrenched in their own world, too wrapped up in their own illusions to even recognize how badly they had hurt me. And yet, as much as I wanted to walk away from it all, there was a part of me that knew I wasn't done. Not yet. I hadn't fully made them understand, not in the way I wanted, but I could see the cracks starting to form. They were uncomfortable, they were on edge, and that was exactly what I needed. Because when people start feeling uncomfortable, they start questioning things. They start looking inward. They start wondering if they really are the good people they think they are. I had learned something in my years of sacrifice, in my years of giving everything and expecting nothing in return. People don't change unless you make them. You can't wait for them to come to you. You can't wait for them to finally get it. If you want change, you have to force it. You have to be the one who shakes them awake, whether they're ready for it or not. And that's when I realized what I had to do next. Andrew. The phone call that came 2 days later was the one I had been waiting for, but I hadn't expected it to come so soon. It was late in the evening and I had just finished dinner when my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. It was him. My stomach tightened, but I didn't hesitate. I answered. "Dad, it's Andrew." His voice was quiet, almost tentative. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about everything." I let the silence hang there, making him stew in it for a second. I wanted him to feel the weight of this. I wanted him to understand that it wasn't going to be an easy fix. It wasn't going to be some quick apology and everything would be fine. "You finally get it, huh?" I asked, my voice flat. I think I do," he said, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I've been a real jerk, Dad. I don't know why I treated you the way I did. I guess I thought you'd always be there. I thought it was just, I don't know, easy. But now I see how much you've sacrificed and it's messed up. I'm sorry." His words, though sincere, were just that, words. Words I had heard a million times before. Apologies that meant nothing without any effort behind them. "I'm glad you finally see it," I said, but there was no relief in my tone. "But that doesn't change anything." "Dad, please," he pleaded. "What do you mean?" "You think this is just about you saying sorry?" I asked, my voice sharp now. "It's not. It's not just about the things you said or the way you treated me. It's about the fact that you never took me seriously. You never respected what I did for you. You just expected me to keep giving." "I was wrong," he said, and this time there was a desperate edge to his voice. "But what do you want me to do? How can I fix it?" I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment. This wasn't the conversation I wanted to have. I didn't want to hold his hand and guide him through his guilt. I wanted him to figure it out himself. But for some reason, a part of me still wanted to try, still wanted to see him take responsibility, even if it was just the smallest gesture. "You want to fix it, Andrew?" I asked. "Then you start by showing up. You stop taking me for granted. You stop using people until they have nothing left to give." He was quiet for a moment and I could hear the sound of him exhaling. I knew he was trying to find the words, trying to figure out how to make it right. But the truth was, I didn't think he could. Not yet. Maybe never. "I will, Dad," he finally said. "I'll make things right, I swear." I hung up the phone without another word. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't the relief I was hoping for. It was just More words, more empty promises, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep waiting for him to change. But I had done what I needed to do. I had forced him to see. I had forced him to confront his own actions, even if he wasn't ready to face them fully. The next steps were his. Whether or not he actually took them, that remained to be seen. I spent the next few days doing my best to keep my mind occupied. The house was long gone, the sale completed, and the cash was sitting in the bank, waiting for whatever my next move was. But the truth was, I didn't know what that next move was yet. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life now that the pieces had shifted so dramatically. But what I did know was this: I wasn't going to let anyone else control my life again. I had been invisible for too long. I had been the one who kept giving, kept sacrificing. But now I was in charge, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. If you think you know where this story is headed, think again. There's still one more card to play, and this is where things start to get truly interesting. If you haven't already, you'll want to subscribe. You won't believe what happens next. It's all coming to a head. The weeks after my conversation with Andrew were quiet, almost eerily so. It was as if the world had taken a step back, leaving me to process everything that had happened, everything I had done. The money from the house sale was still sitting in my account, untouched, just numbers on a screen. It should have felt like freedom, like I had finally untangled myself from the knots of my past, but instead it felt like an open question. What was I supposed to do now? I'd spent my life working for others, for Andrew, for Linda, for her family, for everyone who needed something from me. I'd spent years thinking that if I just gave enough, if I just tried hard enough, things would change, that the people I loved would finally see me, would finally recognize the sacrifices I'd made for them. But they never did. And now it was too late. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to being invisible. But I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with this newfound freedom. Sure, I had the money, the house sold, the future stretching out before me, but what did it all mean? What did I want? It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to take the plunge or walk away. I spent the days walking around the house. Well, the house I used to live in. The place that had once been full of noise, of laughter, of family, was now empty. The rooms echoed with silence. It was an odd feeling, a mixture of peace and loss. But deep down, I knew I wasn't really mourning the house. I was mourning the life I thought I had, the family I thought I had. And I was mourning the fact that I couldn't change them. I couldn't make them see me the way I deserved to be seen. And then one night it happened. I got the call I'd been dreading, but I knew deep down it was coming. It was Andrew. He didn't waste any time with small talk. "Dad, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice tense, unsure. I sighed, leaning back in the chair. "I'm listening." "I don't know how to say this," he said after a long pause. "But I can't keep going like this. I don't want to keep running from the truth anymore, about everything, about you, about what happened." I felt a strange tightness in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I waited. "I know I've messed up so much," he continued. "But I want to make things right. I want to try. I don't want to lose you, Dad. I don't care about the house. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just care about you." It felt like a punch to the gut. His words were almost too little, too late. But they were the words I'd been waiting to hear. For years, I'd been waiting for Andrew to understand, to finally see what I had done for him, for the family. And now, here he was, finally acknowledging it. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Andrew," I said, my voice low, "it's not about the house. It's not about the money. It's about you and me. And for a long time you didn't see me. You didn't care about what I was doing for you, and that hurt. It hurt more than anything." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, the weight of my words settling over him. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try and make it right. I don't know how, but I will." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the flood of emotions that I had buried deep inside me. This wasn't the happy ending I had imagined. This wasn't the dramatic resolution where everything was suddenly perfect, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you need, just a start. A chance to build something new, to rebuild what had been broken. "I'm not going to pretend like everything's okay, Andrew," I said finally. "But I'm willing to try too. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. But I'm willing to see if we can fix this." There was a long, heavy silence, and then I heard him sniffle, his voice shaky. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." I didn't have much to say after that. We talked for a little while longer, but the conversation was different now. It wasn't just words anymore. It was real. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't fixed, but it was a beginning. The beginning of something I had almost given up on, a chance at healing, at rebuilding. After we hung up, I sat there in the dark for a long time just thinking. I didn't have any answers and I wasn't sure I ever would. But one thing was certain, this story wasn't over yet. Maybe it never would be. Life doesn't work that way. It's a slow burn, a series of steps forward and backward, a series of decisions that may or may not lead to where you want to go. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. I could keep moving forward. I could rebuild. I could stop being the person who was always waiting for someone else to change. I had been invisible for far too long. Now it was time for me to be seen. And so, as I sat there in that empty house, staring out the window, I realized that I had taken control of my life. No more waiting. No more giving without getting. I was done with that. I was going to live for me now, for the first time in a long time. And as the night stretched on, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Maybe it wasn't the peace I had hoped for, but it was a peace nonetheless. A peace that came from knowing I had done what I needed to do. I had made them see me. And for once, I was going to see myself too. If you've followed this far, you've seen the darkness and the light. You've seen the struggle, the pain, and the potential for change. But I don't know if this is the end. Maybe it's just the beginning. But one thing I can tell you for sure, I've learned that you can't always predict how things will turn out. Sometimes, the best you can do is step into the unknown and trust that you'll find your way. So, if you want to hear more about what happened after this, if you want to see where this journey led, well, I'll just leave it up to you to decide. But I'm done waiting for answers. I'm ready to write my own story now. And trust me, it's going to be one hell of a ride.